Hello and welcome, everyone. We're so thrilled to welcome you to Yes Presents Pleasure as Power, a conversation with 3 contributors to the new pleasure issue of Yes Magazine. Each of our panelists today has come to embrace pleasure through different means, and I'm excited for all of us to learn more about each person's journey to discovering and centering pleasure in their lives. Throughout this conversation, I invite our audience members to reflect on your own relationship with pleasure, where you found it, when you denied it to yourself, and what centering joy and pleasure might look like in your life. Because as guest editor and panelist Adrienne Maree Brown reminds us in their framing essay for our new issue, feeling good is not frivolous, it is a measure of freedom. And after having the pleasure of editing this issue, I would argue that our collective work to build a more equitable, sustainable, and compassionate world is strengthened when we make the time for joy, relaxation, and celebration of one another and this planet that we all share. I'm Sunnivie Brydum, Editorial Director at Yes Media, a nonprofit reader-supported publisher of solutions journalism for more than 25 years. Yes is based in the Seattle area, which is the ancestral land of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish and Suquamish tribes. I invite you to read our full land acknowledgement on the About page of our website. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our guests. Adrienne Maree Brown grows healing ideas in public through her multi-genre writing, her music, and her podcasts. Informed by 25 years of movement facilitation, somatics, Octavia E. Butler scholarship, and her work as a doula, Adrienne has nurtured emergent strategy, pleasure activism, radical imagination, and transformative justice as ideas and practices for transformation. She's the author or editor of 7 published texts and the founder of the Emergent Strategy Ideation Institute, where she is now the writer in residence. As guest editor on this issue, Adrienne authored our feature story, The Power in Pleasure, and worked closely with the Yes editorial team to determine the frame and stories you'll find in this issue. Welcome, Adrienne, it's great to see you. Tracey Michae'l Lewis-Giggetts has published 18 books, including her most recent, Black Joy, Stories of Resistance, Resilience, and Restoration. In 2021, she contributed to the groundbreaking book, You Are Your Best Thing, Vulnerability, Shame, Resilience, and the Black Experience, edited by acclaimed researcher Brene Brown and founder of the Me Too movement, Tarana Burke. Tracey has spoken on a number of platforms around the country on topics related to race, social justice, healing, and faith and spirituality. Her freelance work has been published in print and online in Essence Magazine, Ebony, Oprah Magazine, TheRoot.com, The Griot, The Washington Post, The Guardian, and more. For Yes's Pleasure issue, Tracey authored the story Black Joy in Pursuit of Racial Justice. Welcome, Tracey. And last but most certainly not least, Goddess Honeybee is a professional dominatrix, purveyor of pleasure, and sex and kink educator. Her work is in the service of the freedom of Black people, especially women, femmes, and gender-expansive people. She's a writer, thinker, translator, facilitator of magic and mischief, and loves conversations about the intersections of kinky sex, Black freedom, and the reclamation of our pleasure practices. Along with Karishi Wigginton, Goddess Honeybee co-authored the story Finding Freedom in Black BDSM for Yes Magazine's Pleasure issue. Welcome, Goddess Honeybee, Tracy, and Adrienne. Thrilled to have you all here. I'm so excited to be sharing space with the 3 of you today, so let's jump right in. I want to ground today's conversation in a thread that I saw woven through each of your stories, the concept of embodiment. To start, I'd like to hear from each of you about what embodiment means to you on a physical level. How do you know when you're feeling embodied, and how does that connect to your pleasure practices? Adrienne, let's start with you.
Awesome, Sunnivie. First of all, thank you for hosting, and thank you so much. Thank you. And I also want to shout out Zenobia Jeffries, because when we first started working on this, she was in the mix, and it's just been such a pleasure and such a growing experience working with you all on pulling something like this off. So I just want to say that. And for me, you know, I've been on a somatics path now for over a decade, and in the somatics pathway, they talk about 300 reps of something gives you muscle memory, and 3,000 reps gives you embodiment. And embodiment means under pressure, that's the thing you're going to do. Like you've been practicing something and you got it embodied so deeply that it's what you'll do. So for those of us, for instance, who've experienced trauma, what might be embodied in our system is fear around pleasure, or a feeling of there's always something to be hyper vigilant about. We can't ever fully let go and surrender into the good, or surrender into just being present. That's what's embodied. And so then it's like, how do we practice? What are the practices that allow us to embody something else? And for me, you know, I for a long time looked at orgasm and orgasmic meditation as just practices to be like, what if I just am giving myself 15 minutes a day where I just practice feeling safe enough to surrender to pleasure, right? And that embodiment has grown throughout my life so that it's, now it's like so embodied that when something comes against it, that I'm like, that doesn't go here. And I can't wait to hear Tracy speak on this. But, one of the things I love is like, once you have embodiment, you can actually hold contradiction. You can hold multiple things at once. You can be in the complexity and not just the embodiment of survivor mode, which so many of us get into. So yeah, I'm really excited about thinking what we embody, not just as individuals, but on a collective level. Like, what is the embodiment of women in this moment, of trans people in this moment? What's the embodiment of Black people? What's the embodiment of those of us who are pleasure activists and really trying to grow something inside this shell of suffering and misery? So, yeah.
Thank you, Adrienne. Tracy, what does embodiment look like and feel like for you?
Ooh, first of all, again, thank you for having me. Thank you for hosting this. I am actually a little bit weepy, so I think that's a great place maybe to start when you talk about embodiment, because when I saw Goddess and Adrienne kind of pop on the screen, there was some energy that I began to feel. And so I think what I will say is I am fairly new to embodiment and somatic healing. And I stumbled, if you will, upon it because I'd begun doing deep trauma work, unearthing EMDR, eye movement desensitization for childhood trauma, and also dealing with an enormous amount of grief as a result of losing a family member to racial violence. And I began to recognize that, as Adrienne just said, my default mechanism was fear. My default was a sense of insecurity or safety. And so everything that I did was acted out of that space. And it wasn't until I began to do work to feel safe in my body, to make room for joy and pleasure, that I began to, number one, embrace it and to hold it and to make it part of my practice, but then also realize that it is actually living in that same space as rage and sorrow and grief, and that was okay, that I could hold those. And as a Black woman, that my ancestors been doing that, right? We've been holding all of these things. And it's just, for me, I think I'm at the stage now where I am reaching embodiment, right? I love what you just said, Adrienne, because I think that I have practiced this enough where my default is now shifting from what it was before. But I'm still challenged by it, if I'm honest. Like I'm still very much challenged about notions of safety, and what that looks like, and how those things kind of show up in my body. And so one of the first things for me, even writing Black Joy, was my therapist asked me a question: what does joy feel like in your body? And stumped me. And I was just like, I'm 40 something years old, and I didn't have any concept, any ability. I'm a writer and couldn't describe what joy felt like. If she hit me with rage, if she hit me with sorrow, I had clear images, clear things that I could draw from to describe it. I couldn't pleasure, breath, joy, happiness, whatever, all of those things created tension and created fear in my body, to the extent that I rejected it. And so I think the work has been, for me, through my writing and my storytelling and, just my own work of settling into my body to the point where I feel safe feeling all of those things simultaneously. So that's sort of my intro.
Good one. Goddess, what about for you?
Yeah, echoing, of course, everyone's gratitude for holding space for this conversation. I mean, and to jump right in, honestly, if I'm honest, I've been in touch with pleasure since birth. I feel like. I arrived 2 weeks late by emergency cesarean. I came when I was ready. And that's pretty much been the story of my life. And I'm really fortunate that my mother, who was raised at a time where women, especially Black women, you know, I'm the grandchild of sharecroppers. I'm the grandchild of people who worked in white people's homes in order to make money. And so for my mother, what was really important to her was raising myself and my sister to never be afraid of our own bodies, to never be afraid of what we feel. And I was the, 5-year-old telling people, you don't have a pocketbook, my love, you have a vagina, right? I'm like, nope, that's a vagina. Later learned, nope, that was a vulva, but it certainly wasn't a pocketbook. To this question, and so this question of embodiment, and so Adrienne and I are in some of the same groups of practice, communities of practice around somatics. And this idea of 300, 3,000, it just makes a lot of sense why pleasure for me feels like an embodied experience. And that when I think about the things that I learn, when I think about the way that I move through the world, so much of it is continuously asking myself, is this in alignment with my deepest yes, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm always going to be excited about what I'm doing. And I think that that's interesting, right? Because the pleasure may be in the end goal. The pleasure may be in recognizing that, I'm doing these things for the sake of this bigger thing. And when it comes to kink, and really specifically BDSM, there are so many practices that I would argue are somatic practices, because they are very much about the body. They are entirely about the body. And it's what makes me excited about this sort of like continually developing field of somatic sexology, is that this idea that paying attention to like what Adrienne taught us in Emergent Strategy, like what we pay attention to grows, and being able to pay attention to, like Tracy said, we are so practiced at paying attention to the places that hurt. We are so practiced at paying attention to the places that don't feel good, to the places that remind us of our worst moments and our worst selves. And if it really is true that we are our best thing, then it means that what we must pay attention to has to be the things that really deliver joy. And being able to walk with someone who has made the choice to surrender to me, to surrender their bodies to me. Being able to walk with someone on that journey of healing, of confronting those things, of creating a reality where that body is celebrated and where that body is desired, is a really deep honor, And so, yeah, that's how embodiment shows up for me.
I think that's so powerful. And I think each of you touched on this, and it's something that I think we don't always talk about in these kinds of spaces. And I think you're right, Goddess. Sometimes we think like pleasure is like where if we're not focusing on the pain, then we're focused on the pleasure. And we don't always think about like the work that it takes to get there, right? Pleasure might be the end goal. It might mean we're doing things as a means to reach that end that perhaps are not inherently pleasurable, but we know will ultimately bring us relief. But I think a precursor to a lot of that, and you each touched on this, is safety, and feeling that sense of safety, to be able to even access the thought that we might feel joy in our bodies and know what that's like. It's also a thing I'm working through in therapy. Like, am I allowed to feel this kind of joy? Am I allowed, and what do I need to feel safe enough to do that? Because feeling joy and being ebullient like that is vulnerable, because our society teaches us, particularly as folks who are socialized as women, that we should either be, our joy should be for the consumption of others, right? It's the, oh, you'd be a lot prettier if you smiled, honey, kind of thing. We're like, well, no, I should smile because something's making me feel good, not because you, stranger on the sidewalk, think I'd look prettier if I did, right? But we aren't taught that culturally. And I think there's this collective healing that has to happen. And that's another thread that kind of runs through each of your pieces. Tracy, in your article, you write that as much as I want collective change, I want collective healing, whether or not the dismantling of white supremacist systems or laws ever happen. And I think that's really critical because we spend a lot of time in movement spaces thinking and talking about all of the hard stuff, the trauma that occurs, the systems that need to be dismantled, the challenges we have to face head on. But we tend to spend less time talking about the necessity of pleasure, or even as a precursor, how we build safety in those spaces to be able to access that pleasure and do so collectively. So I'm wondering if you could each share a little bit about the role that joy or pleasure has played, or that you believe the role of joy and pleasure should play in our journey towards collective healing. I'll let whoever wants to jump in. That's for all of you.
I'm down to jump. Because what immediately came up for me, what was bubbling inside of me as you talked about it, was, so again, in BDSM, nothing's ever really safe, right? I mean, so for me, my specialties are knives, wax, I play with fire, I hit people, I, do things that are, yes, I am practiced at them. And so it is safer than someone who is not practiced at them. But at the end of the day, and this is why a lot of folks in our community move from safe, sane, consensual to risk-aware consensual kink, it's because it isn't that you're necessarily engaging in things that are safe, but it is that you are fully aware of the risks of what you're engaging in. And I think that when we think of what it means to create safety, it isn't necessarily about, safe proofing or baby proofing all the surfaces. We're never going to be in a place where everything is soft and everything is safe. But one, I mean, it is about thinking about how do I work so that I know I can always come home to myself, right? That I always get to be my safe space. And how do I build the muscles to enter into things, enter into situations, take risks, fully aware? And what would it look like for people, all of us, to be engaging in relationships, in work, in activities, in anything where we actually got to choose fully, where our yes was a full yes because we knew as much as we could about what we were entering into. And so much of what we consent to, especially when I think about labor, so much of what we consent to is what we think we have to consent to, right? It isn't necessarily about what we really want to do or what moves us. It isn't that we're fully aware of the risks of, entering into a particular field so much as we're aware of the risk of not participating in capitalism, right? That we're aware of what happens when you don't try and compete. Yeah, and so I guess that's what I wanted to say about safety.
I'd like to jump in because I think one of the ways that we can create safety, experience joy and pleasure, I think it's very much connected to self-compassion. It's very much connected to the processing of guilt and shame. It's very much because I think, and one of the reasons why I kind of wrote Black Joy with these movements of resistance, resilience, and restoration, because resistance is only one part. That sort of, I'm going to, have joy and experience joy as a kind of defiance to the systems is only one piece of it. And from that, we get resilience, we get that creativity and that bounce back that comes from, resisting. But that restoration, the refreshing, the restoring, the healing that happens, that's a piece that I almost feel like my ancestors are saying, run on. That's the piece that y'all need to take care of, right? Because at some point, I think what was passed down is this idea of what you just said, Goddess, which was, doing things because, not because it's a full yes. Oh, I just love that language, but it's because we feel like we kind of sort of should be doing that, and that's what we were told should do, and that's what we've been socialized to do. And so that's the next course of action, right? Whether or not that gives us that inner feeling, that inner safety, that inner sense of self and grounding, that wasn't what I was given. I'll speak for myself. That wasn't what I was given. What I was given, it was a lot of guilt and shame around experiencing joy and foreboding joy, right? Like, so I sit, and I'm having, I'm sitting at the shore, and I, my thing is water. Like, I'm very, I'm a Cancer, so water is very much, the thing that soothes and heals and brings me so much joy and so much pleasure. And so I moved to the water, but in the process of moving to the water, I had so much stuff around that. Like, how dare you? Who are you to, right? Like, I'm from the South, and like, there was a lot of that kind of, audacity, right? Like, you have a lot of audacity to want this for yourself, or experience this for yourself, or want this for your children. And so I think for me, how we get to collective healing despite what's going on in the world, how we get to safety, because I mean, you're right, Goddess, like, when I look at the world, the reality, I don't know if any safety is going to come from the outside. I want us to know what inner safety feels like. And again, I feel like that's connected to how much compassion we have for ourselves, right? How much grace we give ourselves, how much empathy we have. Like, because if I can do that for myself, then I can do that for Sunnivie and Goddess and Adrienne. I can extend it. And then that's when the collective healing happens, right? Because I have an inner safety, an inner security, and room for all of my emotions. And I'm not feeling away because I have so much rage. I'm not standing in I wrote in the piece, standing in solidarity with my rage and not allowing joy in, because for some reason that would be bad for the people that are grieving. And like, I'm operating in the fullness of who I am. And so therefore I can, and here's the piece. When I can do that, I can allow you, trans person, I can allow you to be who you are, because I'm so full and secure in who I am. And I've given myself all the grace and all the space and all the safety and I've done that inner work. Then I don't need to devastate you. I don't need to hurt you and bring pain to you. I don't need that, because that's not going to serve me, and it is not going to serve the collective. So I feel like I was rambling, but yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Where I come from, we call that preaching. So like, okay. I don't want to intervene on your inner story of yourself and what you're doing, but I had to write notes because I'm just like, y'all are just invigorating my mind. And one of that feeling of safety from within it's everything. It's becoming everything to me. And I've been saying this a lot lately, that healing is the actual victory. Like, I was trained up as an organizer. I was like, the victory is like, we have to win some policy over some other people and make them heal, basically. And it just keeps going back and forth, swinging back and forth. And I'm like, I never felt more free because of those kind of victories, like in the long run. But what I have absolutely felt more free, and where I would say we're sitting on this call as some of the freest women who've ever existed in history, I think that's because of the healing work that we're doing, right? That the healing is the victory, that we are reclaiming ourselves from all these constructs of oppression, all these acts of oppression, all these violences of oppression, what our ancestors, it's like they survived and stuff got passed down. And there's things that we are unlocking and unraveling and shifting out of our systems at a somatic level in this lifetime. And that to me feels like the victory. And one of the things I've been sitting with lately is this idea of like, I thought I had figured it out in my 20s. You know, I was like, sex, okay, sex is my freedom land. Sex, I can feel so alive. But what I've been recognizing is like, it is an aliveness, but it was an aliveness in absence of all the other aliveness that I was due. So I would allow myself to be actually in quite dangerous circumstances to access that aliveness. And when I look back now, in some ways, I'm like, I gave away the keys to the castle to people who did not deserve to be inside of it. And I self-negated in this way because I just wanted the aliveness so much. I was willing to trade it all. And as I get older, I know I can see that. Like, I'm like, oh, look at that. This desire to be alive, desire to be seen, desire to be free. I don't want that to ever make me feel unsafe. So I'm this feeling of safety from within is like, who deserves to come into my body? Who deserves to come into my life, in my home, in my space at all? And like, the more healed I am, the easier it is for me to feel that, right? And then I also fucks with the idea of moving from safety to risk and bravery and other assessments, right? Because I do think that inside of racialized capitalism and patriarchy and all of that, there's a limit to the external conditions of safety that we can set. But within that space, I can say, where does it make sense for me to be brave and take major risks? Where does it make sense for me to be vulnerable, right? I'm going to come be vulnerable here with whoever shows up here. This feels like a space. I might not go over in some of the areas right near where I live and bust out and be like, hey, y'all, let me tell you all about my queer, sexual, awesome adventures, right? Because it wouldn't be, they might be very brave, but the risk is so high, it's no longer safe. And as I learned to feel it in my body, it's so small. Like, it's so small still, right? That what the feeling is, I have to slow down. And y'all, anyone who knows me knows that I like to barrel through everything in life. Like, I'm a fast mover, and I'm having to like slow down and drop in. And like, when someone offers me something that feels like a delicious, ripe fruit that's going to just be so good for me, I have to slow down, because if I slow down, I can be like, oh, but there's a poison in it. I can sense something in my system is saying no. Something in my system knows that's not the fruit for me. It'll be good for someone else's system maybe, but it's not the one for me. And I wasn't able to feel that until I'm 43. It feels like it's 3 months old. And, you know, I also want to name that because it's continuous. Like, I feel like I see so much presentation of like, we got it. We figured it out. I got it. I'm in my body. I'm free. You know, I'm like, no. It's ongoing. And I expect it to be ongoing because it's centuries that I'm trying to address and unravel and heal through my lifetime in such a way that now people who are born into the world right now can look and be like, oh, those are some fat, Black, free, queer women, and they're satisfied, or at least they touch into satisfaction. And some other phone call, I want to talk about the erotics of the ocean, because I'm also like, I find water just to be one of the most erotic spaces for my body, like to be surrounded by water, to be in water. It's just like, I am water. I'm this powerful. So I'm like, you moving to be by the water. I'm like, yes, I also need to live by the water. And I'm like, I'm not going to ever I don't think I ever want to live in a landlocked place. I'm like, I want to feel free. I want to be where the ancestors who left for freedom, I want to be near them. So,
yeah. Can I just say something really quick? Because I like, y'all are just brilliant. Like, in the inner ear, like that inner, it's an inner ear, it's an inner listening that you're talking about that feels so right. And you said healing is the victory. I just want to share this story because I was talking to my partner the other day, and I just blurted out like, I think I'm in my hoe phase. And he was like, excuse me. What you mean, because we're monogamous. So he's like,
oh, you're like, do you need to negotiate, baby?
No, but I had been doing some journaling, and I had made this acronym called Healing Over Everything. Right, which is HOE. And I was like, that's it. I'm in my whole phase. I'm in my healing over everything. That healing really is the victory. But it's not a destination, though. It's not like a stopping point up ahead. And like the fact that you said that there's like this little it seems really small,
That's right.
but it's like a seed,
Yes.
right? And it's planted and it's oh yes, I'm
Well,
sorry.
and bringing it back to the question around somatics, that's
Yeah.
what practice does, right?
Exactly.
Being able to practice something different enables us to embody something different. And if we
Exactly.
are embodying something different, we are literally changing our reality. We are being different. And
That's
so
right.
the thing about what we're talking about, the power of somatics, the power of practice, like
Yeah.
good sex, good times, good conversation, I mean, that shit doesn't just happen,
No.
right? You plan for it, you practice it, you get it wrong, you
Yeah.
evaluate, and then you continue to practice, you continue to get it right. And the hope is that you get it right more than you get it wrong, right? Perfection isn't the destination.
Right.
It's
and there's so much about it, Aja, goddess, honeybee. There's so much about it that's also about communication. Like part of why it felt so important to me to do this issue of the magazine, part of why it was important to me to publish Pleasure Activism and read Black Joy. And everyone doesn't know this yet, but Goddess is also working on a book about Black kink and pleasure and BDSM. Part of why it's so important to me that we write it down, that we communicate, that we talk about it, is every leap forward that I have made in these realms has happened through conversation with others. It's not something like, it's like I was like 4 or 5 when I was first like, oh, clitoris, hello, welcome to this realm. But I needed conversation with other people to be like, and there's no shame in that.
Yes.
And it's okay. Yeah. And actually, we all feel these feelings, and actually don't feel sad that you gave yourself away because someone told you that no one would want you if you were fat. And so you had to disprove that through practice or whatever. Like all these conversations, and often conversations that were like cut deep enough to let the tears out, you know? Yes. It was like, open the water, get it out, move it out. Like the stuff that's blocked has to flow. And I think that communication is one of the ways that it flows. And that I always feel, I'm like, if I can't say the truth, I'm not safe.
That's right.
Period.
Right. And the water that we are is what, like, you know, feeds those seeds, right? Yeah. That grows into our safety, that grows into our richness and ultimately our liberation. I think, you know, that each of you in this conversation kind of touched on these like ancestral legacies, and Tracy, in your piece, you write about this as well, about this like ancestral legacy of joy, which is distinct from happiness, right? Happiness is like, you might feel happiness in this moment. I feel happiness when like my dog comes and cuddles with me, or my child says something adorable, right? That's happy. But joy is different. Joy is deeper. It is, I think it's, you know, more, it's more rooted in your body, and ideally is more resilient, and can help carry you through some of these difficulties. But then we do experience these moments of grief, of sorrow, of profound suffering. And culturally, we focus on that quite a bit. But Tracy, you wrote really powerfully about kind of this ancestral legacy and your journey to embrace the both and, right? In your piece, you talk about like 2020 was a great year and it was a terrible year, right? And so I'm wondering, you know, as we talk about these things, and I think racialized capitalism and patriarchy and just everything about the US has taught us that like we must not only be perfect at what we're doing if we're going to be worth doing at all, right? But we also like have to get to the destination right away, and there's only one way to do it, and there's only one destination. And I just don't think that's true. And so I'm wondering if each of you, you know, if you feel you've also kind of been on this journey to embrace that duality of both and, that we can experience joy and sorrow, and that neither are actually cheapened by the presence of the other. If you can just share a little bit about, you know, what embracing that looked like for you, or what shifted for you as you embraced that duality. And since this question is rooted in Tracy's article, I'm going to start with you.
You know, I think Black and brown folks are made to believe that the totality of who we are is trauma, pain, and all of the residue of our transgenerational experience. And that's probably the least of who we are. And so I think what my work was realizing that, you know, me saying Black joy is resistance or resilience, that wasn't a new thing. Like it didn't, I mean, the phrasing, you know, was new, I guess, but like, my great-great-grandmother, my great-great-great-grandmother who lived on a plantation in Wilmington, I should say held captive on a plantation in Wilmington, North Carolina, understood something about how to move. I come from a family of women who are rockers. So you even like in this call or when I'm in a Zoom, I'm a rocker. And some of what I realized through therapy and through some of the working and actually being able to put language to it was that I self-soothe this way, right? Like this is, and my mom self-soothes, and my grandmother and my great, and all through the matrilineal line, we self-soothe through rocking. And I say that because I think that, when circumstances aren't particularly happy, I'm grieving today. There is still an undercurrent of something else that drives us to soothe. And yes, joy is physiological, like it's the dopamine and the adrenaline, and it's all of the stuff that physiologically is happening in our body when we experience pleasure. But I think for Black and Brown folks, it's housed within a particular experience. And so again, it's a duality, as you said, or even multiplicity, I guess, where like there's a bunch of stuff happening at the same time. And my great-great-grandmother and my grandmother, they knew that. And so they could simultaneously live in very horrifying situations and circumstances. They could migrate from North Carolina to Kentucky and wherever else they went. They can have these really hardships and yet know how to rock and love to dance, swear we can sing. Like all of these things that are living simultaneously in our bodies. And so I think something happened though, that, and I don't know if it's like personal trauma, but for me, something happened that cut it off. That said, you only get your rage, you only get your grief, you only get your sorrow. This joy stuff, this peace stuff, that's not for you. And so the work I think for me has been, again, we keep coming back to this embody, is like understanding that there was a gift given to me that I lost somewhere along the way that said that I can have both my rage and my grief. And maybe, and this is something I just want to put out to Adrienne and Goddess, because I've been pondering it, but I'm not sure I've worked it out yet. But like, is it that it doesn't cheapen our rage, our sorrow, our grief to have joy, but does it serve it in some way? Does our joy, does our joy and all of the good, juicy, pleasure that we have, how does it serve our grief and our rage and our sorrow? I know it keeps me from jumping off the edge, and it keeps me from running up in somebody's mouth. It keeps me from, hurting myself or hurting other people. I get that.
Yeah.
But in what ways does it hold space for, using that language, the other parts of me? I think I'm wrestling with that. I don't know that I know the answer to that yet. But I do feel like that since I've been on the joy journey, and since I've been practicing joy and writing in my joy on a daily basis and doing these things that I love, that something is happening to my grief and rage. It's not going away though, but it's informing it. Maybe that's what it is. It's informing it, and it's changing it to what I'm still trying to figure it out. So I just want to put that out there. That's what I was thinking.
I see you. Go ahead, baby.
I feel like I see us both.
I know, but I can.
I feel like yes, it absolutely. Speaking for myself, my joy definitely tempers my rage. And I don't mean temper as in like the lessening or cheapens or like it makes me less angry. I think it actually makes me more focused. And instead of having me focus only what my rage does And Adrienne knows I can be a very angry person. When I'm very like, I'm a Taurus. So, you know, I get angry and I like to stay there. And what I found was that when I'm angry, I have a very narrow vision. I'm really not, all of my options are not available to me. I am sitting in that rage and all I can think of is how to break something down. I want to tear it down. I want to burn it down. And when I am in my joy, I am reminded of the things that I want to create, right? When I am with people, when I am in collective and we are experiencing joy together, we are experiencing pleasure together. I just got goosebumps when we are with Bold, which is a collective that we belong to. I sit in the midst of that, even when we are still in the midst of such Black suffering, and go, this space, this maroon space, this powerful, powerful, beautiful space is what I want. This is what I want. And it helps me focus on it. It helps me go, yeah, this is the thing I need to pay attention to. Yeah, like, yeah, everyone knows that everything's fucked up. And so, okay, and we tear it down and then what, right? Like, we don't have practice at what are the things you want to create? How does, like, when your therapist, Tracy, that was so powerful, when your therapist is like, yeah, where do you feel pleasure? Like, when you think about pleasure, where do you feel that inside of your body? And we can't answer that. I mean, as a movement, we cannot answer that, right? We have like Black joy events, and like Black joy is this like separate thing. It's this other thing we're doing when we're not fighting. And really, it's our joy, it is our pleasure, it is our deepest yes, it is our ancestral knowing, it is all of those things that inform, what we want to see, what we want in the world. And how powerful is that?
Yeah, I am like, really, this question feels like the heart of my life, you know, like I'm like, oh yes, this is it. This is the heart of my whole existence. And one of the first poems I was ever introduced to, or collections, was Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. And he has that line in there where it's like, our sorrow carves out the space that will then be filled with our joy, and our joy carves out the space that will fill with our sorrow. That's that right. They are the same act in different phases of time. And I feel like they're also signs of aliveness, right? That when I'm alive, I can feel joy and love, and I care, and I'm scared, and I can feel loss, and I can feel grief. All of that's happening because I'm alive. When I sink into my most depressive despair states, I don't feel almost any of that, right? The range is not available to me. I could care less, right? And I think one of the things I talk about is always like, there's a before the trauma became the main condition or the way we think of ourselves. There's something that predates that. And I think our bodies remember that. And every birth is a memory of that. Every birth, you look at the baby and you're like, you don't have it. You don't have it. And as a doula, you know, like looking at someone and being like, oh, no one hurt you. And someone's going to, because of the world we live in, it's going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And how can I infuse you with the power of your joy, the power of knowing there's nothing to fix, there's nothing wrong with you. I'm so curious about who you are. How do I infuse you with all of that? Because that's what's going to help you get through. And sometimes I think, how did Black people survive slavery? How did Indigenous people survive the genocidal attempts? How did we survive? I think it's because in our cells, there's a memory of the before, where there was nothing wrong, there was nothing to fix. We were figuring it out. You know, we were being humans figuring it out. And if there's a before, I believe there's also a beyond, right? There's something in us that can feel that we're moving towards something. This is a middle passage still, right? We're still in that journey where we're on stuck in someone else's imagination ship, right? And I'm like, we're stuck in here, but this is not the fucking world. And we know that because we can feel it from within. And I also think this experience of particularly satisfaction, like for me, joy is when I feel fully satisfied. In that moment, it's just like, oh, fuck, this is what I'm alive for. Like, I'm supposed to be here completely being held and surrounded by these children who love me. I'm supposed to be here with this lover rocking my world. I'm supposed to be here with this ocean and this sunset, and I feel this joy. And sometimes I wish I could time travel and just go talk to Harriet Tubman about joy and satisfaction, because I feel like our movements, something we've lost is because we don't incorporate and focus on joy and satisfaction, particularly. We settle for the false orgasms of almost everything, right? We're like, that's good enough. That's close enough. I don't know. It's good. Good. Just, finish. And it's like, I don't want this campaign to finish if I'm not fucking satisfied, if I don't feel joy, right? Joy is a sign that we have actually completed the thing that we were here to do, that we're here, that we landed it, right? And I'm like, Harriet Tubman, I think she knew a lot about satisfaction and dissatisfaction. Like that she was like, I got myself here. That's not enough. I'm not satisfied, which is how I feel. Often I'll be like, I feel so free. I'm writing, I'm doing what I want to do, but that's not enough, because I'm looking around at all the people I love, and they're like, I'm still stuck in these institutions. I'm still stuck in these miserable relationships. I'm still stuck. And I'm like, get the fuck free. We're not doing that. It has to be in community. And then it's like, who's going to be the shotgun on each other's backs? Like, what is the loving version of that? To be like, I won't let you turn back to misery. Not on my watch. Even if the only thing I can hold up, sometimes I think the shotgun is the mirror, right? It's just sort of like, I just want you to see, like, you could be alive and this isn't it, your aliveness is not intact. And I think if you're not willing to grieve, if you're not willing to risk the loss of everything, you can't gain anything, right? And I will just say, final thing, I promise, is there's a way that, like when I feel great joy, I also feel often a great release, right? Like I think of the orgasmic release. When I feel often orgasms bring me a release of intense laughter and crying, like everything is just releasing all together. Like it's like, I feel like the feelings are like, oh, catch the wave, we going, But there's also something about like, it makes me let go of the structures that can't, like, I'm like, who cares how I look? Who cares how I sound? Who cares about anything but this aliveness? I can release everything else. And I feel like we have to be willing to release that completely for the level of stuff we need to release. Like to release capitalism as a structure that we're all maintaining, we have to be willing to like shake it all loose and grieve and feel loss and feel sorrow and then taste joy and be like, it's worth it. It's worth not having Amazon deliver packages to my house because I feel so good about this future we're co-creating or whatever it is, right? So there's something in there to me that I'm like, we have to learn to feel deep satisfaction. We also have to learn to feel grief and honor and like be like, yeah, that's because I fucking loved. I can't grieve anything I don't love.
Right.
And thank God I have so much grief. That means I'm loving so fully, so much, so often, so frequently, so intensely. So yeah.
What I hear you both of you are saying is that like the joy and the pleasure, and this resonates with me. It expands you. It makes you bigger, right? So that of course, if I put a little bit of water in a little cup, it's only going to go so far. But if I put a little bit of water in a big cup, it has all of this room to move into, and so I feel like maybe that's what I'm experiencing. Somebody in the chat said transformation is happening in that moment because the grief, the sorrow, the trauma, all of that has more room because I'm getting bigger because the joy is making me bigger. This is, when you talk about orgasm and I always, when I think about orgasm, and I'm not one to usually talk about it, but I will.
Look at you.
But like I always feel bigger than my body.
Yes.
Like I feel
because we literally are, Tracy.
That's right. You are expanding.
It feels like I am like this is physical, but like I feel like I'm outside of myself, right? And I feel like that must be some correlation between that and what's actually happening in my spirit when it comes to all those other emotions. So I'm sorry, I just keep
and it makes me feel so pleased and to think that like all along the path going back, that was available to our people, right? That like, no matter how big the suffering was, and maybe even how rarely they got to get in that moment, there's so many love stories all along. There's so many stories of pleasure. There's so many stories of stolen moments, sneaking to the cabin. Like, I don't know. It just helps me to remember that. And sometimes I'll have an orgasm and dedicate it backwards. I'm just like, send this one.
That's for you, great grandma.
That's for you, great grandmother. You know, like, I hope this reaches you and sustains you a little bit so that, you know, because you gave me so much, right? So
powerful.
Really.
So I think this conversation is actually a really beautiful segue to one of the audience questions, and we're going to run a little long. I think that's what's going to happen. I want to talk to the three of you for like the next 4 hours. We're not going to do that, unfortunately, but I would love to. And a reminder to our participants, if you have questions for the panelists, please put them in the Q&A, not in the chat. You all are just dropping brilliance in the chat and we can't keep up. So put it in the Q&A if you've got a question for us. But this question comes from an anonymous viewer who is wondering if the panelists can speak to the intersection of chronic pain and pleasure. They share that they've had a chronic lower back injury for the last 13 years and find that my body has created such an intimate relationship to pain that is so consistent that the sensation of it in my body can often overpower my ability to allow for pleasure.
I know I can definitely, you know, at least speak to, as someone who lives with a chronic illness, even during 2019, I was pretty much bedridden for 8 months. And they really didn't know what was going on. It was constant and chronic pain, headaches, you know, vertigo, the whole thing. And I went to an acupuncturist to get, you know, to do some, it's something I had done. I, you know, got some pain work done, pain management, and she put the needle right here in my, I guess, clavicle. And when she hit it, I wailed. I cried.
Yeah.
I cried like I had never cried before. And it was kind of funny because I was like, what's happening to me? I don't know why I'm crying. I had no, like, what was happening. But there was so much in my body that was seemingly trapped that when she kind of hit that one particular pressure point, there was an unloading that happened. And so what I began to realize was that some of what I experienced as chronic pain has been two things. One, trauma and pain and grief and emotion and all those things that we've just finished talking about, finding space in my body to be, right? And that's not taking away from like actual physical illness or, you know, anything like that. But for me, I know my chronic pain was some of it was connected to trauma. And also because I had it for so long, fibromyalgia diagnosed, you know, 20 years, the whole nine, I became quite comfortable with it. It was familiar. It was safe for me. And so if there was any moment of relaxation or like when I was pregnant with my daughter, for some reason, all my fibromyalgia just went away. For some reason, I didn't have hardly any chronic pain and it scared the daylights. I mean, I thought every day I was going to die because I did not have pain. Because I was so frightened at this idea that, and I was thinking like, so y'all just walking around here like free like this, like with no pain in your body and no, like it was so hard for me. And even, you know, there are times where I struggle with that even today, where like I am in complete state of relaxation and calm and I'm terrified. You know, like it feels, because I had spent, you know, so one of the challenges,
Tracy, like, does it have
it is definitely connected to a particular sexual assault that I had. That's I had to be hyper vigilant and alert and make sure that I was aware of who was coming in my room.
Yes.
And also holding my breath, which is the reason why I shallow breathe for 30 years, right? Because you know, deep breaths, which creates relaxation in the body, terrified me. I thought I'm not in control. Something bad is going to happen. And I experienced that, and it's been part of the joy practice, right? Like part of my is like experiencing joy and like, I've been double dutching with joy. Like, okay.
Yeah.
You know, like, okay, I get in. Okay, I'm safe. And so there's a concept called internal family systems, where I have conversations with the various versions of me, right? Because like my therapist uses the bus as an analogy. She's like asking me all the time, so who's driving the bus right now? Because if 8-year-old Tracy is driving the bus, you gonna crash, because only way that she knows how to be safe is to hold her breath, to hold her muscles really, really tight,
Yes.
and to not relax for any single moment, because anything can happen. Right. And so if she's driving your bus, then of course, you know, when you go on that vacation, you're not really going to vacate, right? Like you're going to still be present. And so, I mean, present with your pain and present with your fear. And so the work for me was someone who still lives with chronic pain, very real chronic pain, you know, that I take my CBD for and everything else.
With my CBD right now, I'm like,
there you go. There you go. Like very real, has been figuring out what's physiological happening, like what's physical and what is connected to my trauma. And I think for anybody who has chronic pain, I encourage them not to throw away your meds or anything like that, but to try. Yeah, don't do that. I'm not saying do that, but try to figure out what's showing up. Is it the trauma that's showing up in your body in that moment, or is it, you know, they're very much connected. So is the trauma that's showing up that then's triggering your muscles to contract? And, you know, if they've been contracting like me for 35, 37, 38, 46 years, right? Then of course you're going to have a physiological response, because your body can't hold its muscles tight for 46 years and there not be one. So like that's how I would respond to someone who definitely you know, definitely has that. So
yeah, I mean, I'm really moved by what you're sharing, Tracy. And it feels so like, you know, as someone who's also living with chronic pain, part of what I've had to orient around is like, it's not an accident that even though I'm more free, my body is still conditioned to cage.
Yeah.
It's still conditioned to the cage. It's still conditioned to like create limitations. And it's also like the reaction of living in these systems, right? Like, I'm like, how would I relax? How would I relax here? You know, someone's going to shoot me if I relax. Someone's going to assault me if I relax. Someone is going to aggressively be racist or homophobic or transphobic or something to me if I relax. Why would I ever do that? And that holding that you spoke of, which is also feels ancestral. Like, I look at the shapes, I look at pictures of my grandmother, how she held herself, and I'm like, I hold myself like that.
Yes.
And I didn't get that much, nearly enough time around her to be like, oh, I didn't learn that by watching her body. That's passed directly down to my body from her. And who knows who it came from? Who knows who first had to hunch their shoulders in to protect their heart and to shrink their breast and to be less sexualized? Who knows who first had to bend over so much that their back could never fully recover? Who knows who had to squat until they could no longer stand back all the way up? Like, who knows? I think of the chronic pain that's in my body as missives from my ancestors, that I'm like, I may not be able to fully resolve this, but I'm listening. I'm listening, and I'm listening for what are the places where I do have agency that you didn't have, that I can change my practices. So one of the things, like, for instance, I've been really paying attention to is like, I come from lineages of people who didn't get to choose their food. So we live in a toxic food system that is having a horrific impact on our bodies. And the less resource you have, the more oppression you have, the more likely it is that you're eating food that is literally poisoning your system, and your body is just trying to survive somehow through that. And so I've been really getting intentional about like, how do I want to befriend my body and figure out what health looks like from that place. And I do notice that impacts my chronic pain. even though it takes a shit ton of work to try to do,
Yes.
right? But I noticed, like, I'm like, oh, if I stop letting this white sugar toxin of, basically white supremacy in the form of food, like white sugar, white flour, all that stuff, it really, white salt, I'm like, when I reduce those things in my system, everything in my body, the inflammation calms down some, right? But then I also, one thing I want to say related to pleasure is disability justice has also been a super liberating framework for me, particularly from the sins invalid lineage of like naming, how do we start to talk about what our bodies are like, what they need, what care looks like. And that's like, for me, my knees were the first to go. So I was like, okay, I can't just be bouncing around on top of somebody to get the kind of orgasm that I like. So what's the adaptation I can make, and how do I communicate? This is what my body can do and can't do. Don't you dare throw me around and throw my leg over somewhere, right? Like, here's what I can do. And that doesn't mean you have to totally be gentle with me, but we're going to have to find the part of my body that can handle more intense touch. And trying to get more and more creative about that, understanding that the greatest sexual organ in my body is my mind. And from my mind, I can make almost any place in my body available for pleasure. I'm like, okay, you're going to work this elbow and it's going to feel great to me. I know I can do that, So I want to offer that, because I think for a lot of people who experience chronic pain, there's this idea that like you have to get rid of the pain in order to feel the pleasure, rather than there's a balancing and there's a communication that's like the pain is here. It walks with me in this life, but pleasure can also be here. And when I do feel deep pleasure, it relieves everything else that's happening. And every time I have that full body surrender and relaxation, it actually does something for that pain for me.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Goddess. I see you, baby.
No. I mean, what I would add is I have a person who bottoms with me often.
Yeah.
Who has chronic pain. And one of the reasons why they came to me was because they wanted to really investigate that pain. And they wanted to investigate specifically their relationship to pain. And so what they were asking was for more pain, but a different sort with a different relationship. And so much of
and that they had some control, like that they were
that they have all the control over it. Not some, they have all the control over it. Right?
Yes.
And that being able to shift that relationship has been able to help them begin to shift their own relationship with that chronic pain that is never going to go away, right? Maybe it will, but I mean, it hasn't so far, and they are very, very grown. So shifting their relationship with their pain and releasing a commitment to orgasm. And that's hard because orgasm, especially when we're talking about sex, is so great. I mean, I love coming, and people who are anorgasmic also experience sexual pleasure, right? People who have real difficulty climaxing, like there's so many things that can bring pleasure. And one of the things that I really like about impact play, about pain play, about that investigation is it allows you to really turn up your curiosity about your own pain, about your own body, and about the practices that support that reorientation.
Thank you.
Yes, so good.
Oh, there's so much here. There's so much wisdom and joy, and I'm like, keep myself calm as all of you keep saying things that are just like landing directly in my heart. Thank you. There are some more questions from the audience. I know we're running a little long on time, so I'm gonna bring us one more audience question, and then we're gonna wind down. This next question comes from Michelle Zanarosa. Hi, Michelle. She says that a friend and her were talking about solidarity economies and racial capitalism and hope. And this friend said something that really stuck with her, that the way change is going to happen is not how everyone thinks about a revolution that will topple the empire. They see it more like a bunch of termites eating away at a house, eating away at like this kind of prison that we've been kept in. And that will eventually make that big house topple. And she says that this conversation is making her think of that. And so she's interested in what you all can say about pleasure and building practices of pleasure as a means to help eat away at the foundation of this big house that we've all been trapped in by society.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, for me, Pleasure Activism was the second book in the Emergent Strategy series. And the reason for that was because it's like, for me, the emergent strategy concept is that we are this fractal based system, right? So like what we do as individuals matters to what happens to us as a community, and what we do as communities matters to what happens in our interactions with each other. And we are also part of this whole. And so I say that because I do think that pleasure activism is one of the ways we change the frequency of what's happening at the cellular level in each of our individual lives, in the relationships we're in, and thus what a community even is longing for. And that feels so important to me, because I feel like so often we're stuck longing for what someone else tells us is success, or what someone else tells us is freedom, or what someone else tells us is victory. And I learned this by achieving, right? So I would get to some place and I would be like, I'm the boss. I'm a boss bitch. And I was like, this is horrible. I hate this. Like, that I'm now responsible for all these people. I'm not being paid enough. I'm being disrespected. I'm overworking. I'm exhausted and I'm burning out. That's what boss means. Like boss equals burnout. Okay, no, there's got to be some other path to feeling powerful and free in my own life, right? And I say that because I think exactly this. It's not just that we're toppling the house. I think that these systems we're in are so dysfunctional and illogical that their fall is inevitable. But they get us tricked into thinking that we're supposed to sustain them and save them somehow. This is why I'm a post-nationalist. I'm not trying to save this American experiment that was rooted in my subjugation and stolen land. And like, that's not my bag, right? What I'm really interested in saving is small experiments of democracy, small experiments of collectivism, small experiments where people are actually able to care and build communities of care and pleasure and delight and wonder and safety. I want to build small communities where there would never, ever be an instance where we let our children be in danger from sexual harm, from gun harm, from war, from any of it. That the whole thing would be focused on their safety. Because I think, there was another question you were talking about, Sunnivie, at one point about vision. And for me, it's like, when I think of my vision for any kind of future, it's one in which our practices are those in which safety for children and happiness of children is at the center of all society. Those are people who grow up really in touch with their pleasure and in touch with their bodies and in touch with how to relate and consent and get their needs met, right? Like, I'm like, when I think 3,000 years into the future, whatever, I'm like, all I want to see is these little pockets that are in like some kind of technological interweb. We still have coconut water and stuff, but where people are like, I know who I am. It's great to be in my body. It's great to be in the relationships I'm in. I feel really satisfied with my life, that's what it means to be a human, right? Like that we're compatible with the earth in the same way. Like, I don't feel like lions are walking around like, fuck. I feel like they're just like, I'm really satisfied being a lion. I really understand my purpose. I'm living into it. I'm like, humans are so off track. But I feel like that's, to me, the pleasure is one of the ways we keep planting that seed. And I know it matters because when I was first writing about this, I was like, I'm going to ruin my career. Like, no one is going to take me seriously as a leader or thought person or anything if I try to say how important orgasm is to liberation. Like, but luckily Audre Lorde had talked about it and I trust her. And luckily Toni Cade Bambara had talked about it and I trust her. And there is this lineage of folks who've been like, hold up, there's something over this way that actually stops us from self-sabotage, stops us from self-negation. And I think participating in these current systems is a self-sabotage act. And I think pleasure is one of the ways we pull ourselves back from that and say, I don't need to buy anything or fix anything or surgery anything. I don't need to do any of that to feel joy, to feel freedom, to feel myself. If I want to do those things, cool, but I don't need that. My body is a complete joy machine. It's already whole.
That's it. Ooh, that's it. I love what your vision for our future.
Uh-huh.
This post-nationalist, this vision. I think that the challenge will always be, as long as we have boundaries, as long as we have demarcation and lines where we've decided that this is mine and that's yours. This is my land, this is your land from this spot.
Meanwhile, the earth is just laughing like, y'all think you own me? You haven't figured out you're not in control?
Exactly.
Come on now.
And I write a lot about tiny revolutions. So I think it is a revolutionary act, but they're seemingly small. So every single time I allow myself the freedom to laugh loudly with my daughter at the park, as loud as we want, as we swing, and my 46-year-old self on the swing, just
Yes.
Every single time that I do that, I feel like it is a kind of resistance. It's a crack in what I've been told, what my ancestors have been told should uphold these systems that you're talking about, what we should be doing. It's beating up against that. And so I love that so much. And I feel like if everybody is having an inner revolution, having tiny external revolutions, then we're bound to break up. Which might be some of what we're seeing, right? What we're seeing is, a very real awareness that, what has been built is falling apart.
That's right.
And people are fighting violently against, they're holding tightly against. White folks are holding tightly, to what they believe is theirs, but was never theirs, right? So I love that. I love that vision that you have.
I love that this question involved termites. I go into very deep rabbit holes around things, which is why emergent strategy is such a joy. It is and continues to be such a joy, because I'm like, yep, this is exactly how my little brain works. I'm like, oh yeah, cancer is actually brilliant. I remember the first time I learned about HIV in 3rd grade, and I was like, that is brilliant. You have tricked the cells. You have gotten them all on your side. Like, how do I be like HIV? I mean, and termites are, they are matriarchal, like many insects. So like the termite daddies take care of the babies. Termites can't see. So talking about disability justice, termites are blind. They are moving in concert though. So like they literally cannot see one another, but they have all these other ways to feel into one another. They just all sorts of like cool ways that termites, they are actually really important to regeneration, like of the planet. So even though they're annoying when they're in your house, termites' jobs, like they're the turnover. Termites, earthworms, there are lots of creatures whose like role is bringing things, birthing things anew. And so I think,
and they don't need attention while they work. They're like, don't mind me. I'm just going to make your house fall down.
I'm just termiting. And you don't know that the termites have termited until you like go get an estimate and they're like, sorry, actually it's my
And they're only invasive to us.
Exactly.
They're only invasive to us.
Only humans.
Which gives me questioning, are they really invasive? Or
they're not.
Who are the invaders?
Who is
the invaders really?
Exactly.
We took the trees to build the house, right? And they were already with the trees.
They're like, I just said,
baby, I was just coming home. Okay.
I love it.
There are all these ways that like, yes, just make so much sense. So I guess be like the termites. And when I think about this idea of revolution and this idea of freedom, there is no one revolution. There is not. There could not be. There is no one freedom. My freedom is different from Adrienne's freedom, different from Tracy's freedom. Maybe not that different from, but I'm sure. And part of it is, God, what you said is exactly it. It's like being like, oh yeah, I get to just like be. And if I'm born in a body, like being born in a body, no matter what, it's not even just like, it's not a disabled body, because there is no sort of like litmus test where like, oh, this is abled and therefore you're disabled. It's just like, oh, this is my body. And because we recognize that we're important to each other, that we're critical to each other, we make sure each other has what we need to be able to move through the world, right? We are interdependent like the termites. We are collective like the termites. We are moving and we are anti-patriarchal like the termites. And I think it really could be beautiful if we pay attention to all of these unlikely places and unlikely leaders and unlikely gods who really are giving us all of the answers that we say that we're looking for. And they're just screaming, pay attention to me. Pay attention to me.
That message of interdependence, I think, is one that we as humans just keep learning and maybe failing at learning. And I assume we'll continue to keep learning. But
I mean,
this conversation
says otherwise, so we're really up against a wall here.
Right. We get a lot of messages that say that that's not the case, and yet I think, you know, even this conversation, right, where each of us are like building off of what the other was saying, I think is a beautiful demonstration of what happens when we are vulnerable, when we are real with each other, when we realize the ways that our lives, our liberation, and our pleasure is bound up with one another.
Yeah.
Right. Because if it is safe for Adrienne and Goddess and Tracy to experience pleasure, then it will be safer for me to experience it as well, even if we come to this world and this work from different places.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I learned, I guess, kind of putting the pleasure issue together and getting to work with each of you. Like I said, I would love to keep talking all day long, but I know we all have busy lives. Capitalism tells us we have places to be. So I'm going to wind us down. But I just want to say thank you so much to each of you, to Adrienne, to Tracy, to Goddess Honeybee, for joining us and helping us learn about the power and potential of pleasure. It's been an absolute joy to hear from each of you today.
Can I take a picture of us?
Yes.
Like a self, like. I think I got it.
Okay.
We're so cute. I was just like, this feels like a historic conversation to be in, like, at least personally historic. I mean, it just feels like really big. And just before we go, like, I felt each of us taking risks here together. And I want to just like thank myself for my risks. Goddess, I want to thank you for the risk of what you shared. And like, doing this writing is a risk for you. And I'm so proud of you for all the choices you've made in your life to take these risks. It's so brave. And I don't think you have any idea how often I'm in a conversation where people are talking about how you are changing their lives just by seeing how you claim your own. So I just want to say thank you for the risk. And Tracy, like, you are stunning and so brilliant and so incredible to interact with. And I felt the huge risks that you took with what you were sharing with us today and just how honest you were in it. And like, it's so important. It's so important that you speak exactly from where you are and that you tell the stories that you tell. And I hope you just feel well held in how you did that, because you're so brilliant. And I just want you like surrounded by care. And Sunnivie, it's a risk to write about this. I know you took major risks to bring this to the Yes community, and I think it was worth it. And I hope that you feel like it was worth it. And even coming on this call today and like being like, I'm going to host it, I'm going to be here. Like you did a great job. And I just want to affirm everyone because we did this together. So.
And I want to shout out my co-writer again, who like was,
yes,
you know, because that can be a thing. It's like, oh yeah, one person and not the other.
Yeah.
And I just really appreciated all of Karishi's like wisdom and everything that she brings to our writing process. So.
That's right.
Thank you all. I'm in tears. I can't even speak right now, but thank you all just for, you know, through your work and your voice, just creating safe spaces and places for us to do what we did here today. Yes.
And thank you to all of those folks watching. I've been seeing like the numbers have stayed pretty constant throughout, which is amazing. We've got a lot of folks hanging out with us today. And they're just incredible conversations that have been happening in the chat, in the Q&A. Folks are being vulnerable. They're sharing about their own journeys, their own embrace of pleasure or the struggles they've had to do so. In the meantime, I hope you will check out the pleasure issue. If I can do this without blurring Adrienne's beautiful face. There we go. If you don't already have a copy, you can subscribe to it, and you can just, you can subscribe and get one at yesmagazine.org/subscribe, or even better, you can join our monthly supporters at yesmagazine.org/donate, and you'll get a free ongoing subscription to Yes. Every day at Yes, we seek to elevate hope, provide inspiration, and offer solutions for a better world. This work and events like this are only possible thanks to the generous gifts from our community of changemakers. And right now we have one generous donor who's offered to match any gifts made by midnight tomorrow. So I'm inviting you to visit yesmagazine.org/donate if you'd like to make a gift in support of our work. The impact of that gift will be doubled if you're able to make that gift by midnight tomorrow. And thank you so much to all of our current supporters who are determined to create a more equitable, compassionate, and sustainable world and allow us to put on incredible events like this. Thank you so much to everyone here for joining us. Thank you to Tracy and Goddess and Adrienne. I hope that all of you have a joyful rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank
Goodbye,
you.
folks.
Thank you so much.